Okay, we'll start with this. This upcoming weekend, this Saturday, which promises to be a very busy day in the sport of boxing globally, over there in Dubai, unbeaten WBA bantamweight champion Jamie Mitchell of the United States will be in action in defense of her WBA title against unbeaten Nina Hughes of the United Kingdom. I'll keep it short. I'll keep it sweet. I'll keep it simple. I like Jamie Mitchell to win. I like Jamie Mitchell to win the fight and possibly win the fight by way of knockout. I've already broached this subject at least once before. Nina Hughes is a good fighter, shows a decent ceiling, decent ability, but for this fight,
she ain't got it.
Not for this one.
She ain't got it.
Jamie Mitchell is the more experienced fighter in the fight, having faced the better fighters overall. Between them, I think she'll be stronger, faster, and sharper than Nina Hughes. Nina, who at her best shows a mean streak, shows some aggression, but we see how aggression worked out for Carly Thumper Skelly in Jamie Mitchell's last fight earlier this year. She got stopped, and if Nina Hughes isn't careful, she'll get stopped as well. I like Jamie Mitchell to retain the WBA title. This is a must-win fight for Jamie Mitchell, because on the other side of this thing is an even bigger fight and perhaps a bigger purse.
An even bigger purse for a Shannon-Courtenay rematch.
Jamie Mitchell sports a professional record of 8 wins, no losses with 2 draws.
5 knockouts.
To Nina Hughes's 4 wins and no losses with no draws.
2 knockouts.
Jamie Mitchell, she's a few years younger than Nina Hughes, about 3 years younger.
Few years younger, few fights more experienced, stronger overall. And I like Jamie to win.
We still don't know who Shannon Courtenay is going to be facing in her long-awaited, long-anticipated ring return later on this year, next month, on the undercard of Warrington versus Lopez. I can only assume that with the amount of time that she spent out of action, the amount of time she spent away from the ring, it can't be some killer. It's got to be some kind of lighter touch. From the first Jamie Mitchell fight till now, Jamie Mitchell has already seen action 2 times.
The Carly Thumper Skelly fight in February of this year, and the fight set to go down this weekend with Nina Hughes. Jamie Mitchell, at year's end, will have seen action 2 times since having pried the black and gold belt away from Shannon Courtenay.
Where Shannon's been on the bench since she lost the belt late last year in October. She's been on the bench since the Jamie Mitchell fight. This will be her first fight in over a year's time.
And if Shannon wins her fight in December and Jamie wins this weekend against Nina,
they will likely do the rematch between them in either the first or second quarter of next year.
As far as Nina, this will be Nina's 4th fight this year. 4th fight. She already saw action 3 times this year, having debuted as a professional in December of last year, late last year.
Nina, God bless her, she's up there in age. She's 40 years old, so they're fast-tracking her. They're moving her fast because she ain't got that much time left. They probably feel they can't afford to pass up on an opportunity like this, given Nina's age. But I feel that in spite of all of that, she's in over her head with Jamie Mitchell.
She's been fighting. She's been active. She saw action 3 times already this year, and she's about as ready as she's gonna be.
About as ready as she can be at this point, though. Being as ready as she can be doesn't necessarily mean that she's actually ready. This is all relative.
4 fights into a pro career, I don't think she's ready for Jamie Mitchell.
But she's grabbing the bull by the horns and rolling the dice. You've got to give her credit for that. I don't think it's going to work out for Nina this weekend. I don't.
No. I think Jamie's going to retain her WBA title and move into a Shannon-Courtenay rematch if Shannon makes it through her next fight next month.
Didn't forget that Shannon Courtenay was fighting injured in that Jamie Mitchell fight late last year. And now that she's had the surgery and had ample time to recuperate, sat out most of this year.
All she's got to do is shake off the cobwebs.
Shannon Courtenay, somewhat of a social pariah. I mean, she's a capable boxer, a talented one, and a former champion, though she's not really anybody's sweetheart.
But I still think she can put up a better fight than Nina Hughes.
She can. She put up a decent enough one fighting on one good leg, just one good leg. Imagine what she might be able to do on 2.
You know, part of Shannon Courtenay's repertoire is beating those feet. movement, and she wasn't able to adequately do that in the first Jamie Mitchell fight, but in the second,
well, we'll see. In men's welterweight news, reigning WBO welterweight champion Terrence Crawford on Spence fight says, "What do y'all want me to do? I'm trying my hardest."
I think he is, after burning that bridge with Top Rank, unnecessarily, I might add.
If he wanted to part ways with Top Rank in order to make the Spence fight more viable, he could have done so while maintaining an amicable relationship. He chose to take them to court with a frivolous court case that hasn't materialized into anything yet.
It's unfortunate.
The undefeated WBO titleist from Omaha, Nebraska, threw his hands up to a recent query from ESPN's Max Kellerman on Kellerman's Max on Boxing show regarding the Spence fight, hyping up the fight as the best that can be made in the sport. Kellerman urged Crawford to assure him that the fight will happen eventually. "Boxing fans are dying to see this. Tell me that it's going to happen," Kellerman said. "Are you really going to let your career go by without making this fight happen?"
When you frame the question that way, you're placing the burden of making the fight on just one of the aforementioned parties. It takes two guys to make a fight, but it only takes one to fuck it up.
The fight fans are still arguing amongst themselves as to who fucked up this fight. Who fucked it up really?
It's Al Heyman. He's got a long history of fucking up fights.
Why does everybody keep telling me I've got to make the fight happen? Crawford answered. "What do y'all want me to do? I guess I gotta go there. Hey, listen, I'll fight for no guarantee, no back end, no nothing. Let's just fight because that's what the fans want you to do. Like, I'm trying my hardest to make this fight happen, and I just want everyone to know I am trying. I am trying." In the same interview, Crawford stated that he does not believe his legacy will be affected if he never fights Spence, pointing out that he was undisputed champion at 140 pounds and a titleist across 3 divisions.
Oh, Spence ain't no 3-division champion.
He's never going to be undisputed either. I mean, he isn't right now. He hasn't accomplished that, but if I had to guess, he never will be.
Never gonna be undisputed. He's never gonna be lineal.
Earlier this month, Crawford went on a 20-minute monologue on Instagram to give us his side on how negotiations with Spence fell apart, saying that he had exhausted all his options. Crawford, who stated he was willing to fight without a guarantee, pinned the blame mostly on Spence's influential advisor, Premier Boxing Champions founder Al Heyman, who Crawford said was not willing to be transparent on certain financial aspects of the fight. Crawford is now set to take on David Evanesian on December 10th, Crawford's hometown of Omaha, Nebraska, on Black Prime, a largely unknown pay-per-view streaming platform. In order for the Spence fight to be possible next year, not only would Crawford need to defeat Evanesian, but Spence would need to come out victorious in his next fight as well.
We now know that Spence is set to be fighting Keith Thurman in February of next year.
Which comes as a surprise to no one because Terrence Crawford himself said this weeks ago, before the order from the WBC came down.
Before news broke that Tom Brown had filed for an exemption to the mandatory by way of the WBA to allow the Spence versus Thurman fight to move forward.
Without any interruptions by way of the WBA, as a Stenionis was already in the queue as of late last year. He was the guy who was supposed to get a title shot.
We talked about all of that already. The focal point is that Crawford knew ahead of schedule. Crawford knew ahead of time that Keith Thurman would be Errol Spence's next fight.
He was right.
He was telling the truth. And when he says that he's trying his hardest to make this Errol Spence Jr. fight, I believe he's still telling the truth. He's just being given the runaround. Some people don't want to accept that, but that's what I think is going on.
That's what I've always thought was going on. Listen.
Look.
Late last year, the WBA ordered Hughes to fight a Stenionis.
Terrence Crawford became a network and promotional free agent in November of last year, after the Porter fight.
November last year. At this time, Yordanis Hughes was already under orders to face a Stenionis, his mandatory challenger. And
instead of getting the ball rolling then and there for a Crawford versus Spence fight, what did they do? They petitioned the WBA for an exemption to the mandatory so that Hughes could fight Spence, not Crawford.
They had already mapped out Errol Spence Jr.'s next 2 fights. They did.
Yeah.
They wanted him to fight Hughes early this year, and they went as far as offering him up as an option to Canelo Alvarez. That's right. They offered Canelo Alvarez a multi-fight deal, and in the deal, Errol Spence Jr. at a catchweight.
Think about it. Late last year, they started the wheels to do Hughes versus Spence early this year, and they even offered Canelo a Spence fight, which would have presumably taken place after the Hughes fight.
It's not a word sandwich. It's a lot more simple than that. They mapped out Errol Spence Jr.'s next 2 fights. They wanted him to fight Hughes, and then they wanted to move him into a Canelo Alvarez fight, provided Canelo were receptive to the deal. Now, Canelo, he wasn't receptive to the deal. He rejected the deal.
What the hell does any of this mean?
It means that if you were planning on putting Spence in there with Hughes and you were entertaining the possibility of a Spence versus Canelo fight, you weren't planning on doing a Crawford fight.
That's what it means.
It was never their intention to do this fight. Tim Smith, earlier this year, in January, stated that they hadn't made Terence Crawford an offer yet. We often talk about that, what Tim Smith said, that they didn't feel that the pay-per-view would be successful anyway, that people would steal it. But the focal point is that Tim Smith admitted then, in January, that talks hadn't even started for a Spence versus Crawford fight.
They hadn't even made him an offer yet.
Focus on that, all right? Focus. Late last year, they got the ball rolling for an Hughes fight. Early this year, Tim Smith says they hadn't made Crawford an offer yet.
Focus!
They did offer Errol Spence Jr. as an option to Canelo Alvarez, but talks for a Crawford fight, they hadn't even started yet.
Focus!
So if the wheels are in motion for a Spence versus Hughes fight, and you're entertaining the possibility of a Spence versus Canelo fight,
focus!
It couldn't have been your intention to do a Crawford fight. Those talks, an entire dialogue between Team Spence and Team Crawford, that doesn't seem to have kicked off until the third quarter.
Yeah.
Second or third quarter of this year, after Canelo rejected your offer and after the Hughes fight.
It couldn't have been their intention to do a Crawford fight all along. It couldn't have been if you were entertaining the possibility of a Spence versus Canelo fight, because what if Canelo accepts the deal? Well, there goes the Crawford fight.
It's not rocket science, you know.
It wasn't their intention to do this fight. Not initially.
The now defunct negotiations between Terence Crawford, Al Heyman, and Errol Spence. They weren't negotiating in good faith. If you can't see that...
What are you, Ray Charles? Isn't it obvious?
The truth, as it were, the reality of things is often more mundane than it's made out to be. They never wanted this fight.
It's not complex or complicated. If you wanted to put him in there with Hughes and you were willing to put him in there with Canelo...
Where would that have left the Crawford fight had Canelo accepted the deal? Where would that have left the Crawford fight if Canelo said yes?
Nowhere.
Where's the fight now with Terence Crawford?
Nowhere.
And these are all supposed to be coincidences.
Now, maybe you're just fucking stupid.
It's pretty obvious who's been dragging their feet. I'll give you a hint. It's not Terence Crawford.
Terence Crawford then took aim at Errol Spence Jr.'s resume,
saying that you're not the head honcho.
In truth, for a welterweight, Errol Spence Jr. doesn't have a bad resume. Doesn't have a bad resume for a welterweight today.
It's not bad, but it's not worthy of all the hyperbole he receives for it either.
Exaggerated claims.
With 3 world titles tucked safely underneath his arm, Spence Jr. believes that with or without the WBO title held by divisional rival Terence Crawford, that he and he alone reigns supreme atop the welterweight landscape. Crawford, however, begs to differ. "You're not the head honcho," said Crawford during an interview on The Good Fight with Kate Abdo. "You ain't beat me."
Before you go thinking that Errol Spence Jr. is widely regarded as a better fighter or a better champion than Terence Crawford, need I remind you that
on most every pound-for-pound list you can find, by way of every major periodical, Terence Crawford is ranked well above Errol Spence Jr. In fact, Terence Crawford in some pound-for-pound lists is currently ranked as the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter.
I myself, I don't swear by these pound-for-pound lists, you understand. I don't follow them. I'm just highlighting that it's not unanimous.
It's not the general consensus that Errol is a more accomplished fighter or even a better fighter, a better champion than Terence Crawford. Irrespective of how many alphabet titles he holds now, he's still not his division's undisputed champion.
He's not lineal, not Ring Magazine, and it doesn't look like he's going to be, because without Terence Crawford, that don't happen.
Errol's signature wins, I would say, Kell Brook, Sean Porter. You're going to put Mikey Garcia and Danny Garcia and Hughes, even though Danny Garcia never won a significant fight at 147 pounds. He didn't beat nobody. He lost to everybody. Even though Mikey Garcia, he never fought in the division before the Spence fight. Even though Hughes has been beaten numerous times, Sean Porter had already been beaten, Kell Brook had already been beaten. I'm stating facts.
That's what they are.
Terence Crawford's resume, at least his welterweight resume, it's often judged harshly for the fights that didn't didn't happen, behind the narrative that it's been Errol Spence Jr. doing all the heavy lifting, but Terrence tried to get Danny Garcia in the ring. Is it Terrence's fault that Danny rejected Top Rank's offer to him? A $3 million offer.
$3 million guaranteed and a percentage of the pay-per-view's upside. It's Terrence's fault that Danny didn't want to fight him, that he chose to fight Adrian Granados and Ivan Redkach instead.
Why isn't Danny being judged harshly for choosing to fight those fighters instead of Terrence?
You have time for Adrian Granados, you have time for Ivan Redkach, but no time for a reigning unbeaten champion at your weight.
Keith Thurman has been bumping his gums for 2 years about potentially taking on Terrence Crawford, and the story is that Keith wanted $10 million guaranteed. $10 million up front. More money up front than he got to fight Manny fucking Pacquiao.
What Brian Bomac McIntyre said, and if you don't want to believe it from Bomac, Bozy, Jaron Ennis' father and trainer.
He's saying the same thing. He's just saying the same thing about his son. Keith Thurman wanted $10 million guaranteed. $10 million up front for a Jaron Boots Ennis fight. You ask for that kind of money for a Crawford fight. You ask for that kind of money for a Jaron Boots Ennis fight. You know what that means?
It means you don't want to fight.
People are telling themselves that Terrence Crawford is out of line for wanting some transparency in association with a Spence fight where he's not even guaranteed any money, but Keith Thurman isn't out of line for wanting $10 million?
Crawford's out of line, but he isn't?
$10 million for Crawford, $10 million for Ennis.
You're judging Terrence Crawford harshly for fighters that didn't want to fight him.
So that when he don't fight those guys, you resort to saying he hasn't fought anybody.
It's a vicious cycle.
Rendering the monotonous exchanges between factions of fans, factions of Crawford fans, and factions of Spence fans exercises in futility.
You can't appeal to illogical people with logic-based arguments. It'll never work.
You can't do it. I can't do it. What I can do, I can tell you this.
Nobody's high on Keith Thurman. And if you put a Spence versus Keith Thurman fight on pay-per-view, God knows what it'll bring you back.
Beyond that, if Spence wins, the WBA is saying he's got to fight in a WBA title consolidation bout with a Montestanionis, who they've put on the back burner for the second time.
Who they've also ordered to fight Virgil Ortiz. We'll see if that fight materializes.
Spence may be on his way upstairs to 154 pounds beyond the Keith Thurman fight.
Spence versus Crawford may end up being the fight that got away.